For now, we want to turn our attention on the phone to Reagan biographer Craig Shirley, joining us from Alexandria, Virginia. And I have to say, Craig, they had quite the storybook journey from Hollywood to the White House. Can you talk about, from the beginning, them as a couple to how she lived her life in later years?
Well, first of all, it's a very sad day. Theirs was one of the great love stories of the American presidency, spanning over 50 years. They actually met on a blind date. He was president of the Screen Actors Guild, and her name had shown up on a list of suspected communist provocateurs in Hollywood, and she was very distressed about this. She was making the movie Song of the Turtle at the time, and so she turned to the director, and he said, look, call my friend Ronald Reagan, or I'll call Ronald Reagan for you. He's president of the Screen Actors Guild, and he'll look into this. So they met on a blind date, and they confessed later that if the date didn't work out, they were both going to call in early and say that they had a screen test the next morning at 6 a.m., but they ended up not only having dinner, but going to a show. And in many ways, their first date lasted over 50 years. They were utterly and completely devoted to each other, and sometimes actually we're quite happy just to be alone at the ranch, or traveling, or at the White House, or at Camp David, just the two of them. It is truly a great loss for America. It's a great loss for the Reagan family.
I have to say, she was really known as his protector, both in 1981 during the assassination attempt. She was by his side the entire time he was in the hospital. She became really his protector again through his Alzheimer's disease and his struggle with that disease. Can you talk about just how tough she was in terms of standing by his side?
It was almost an O. Henry story of irony, in that they took from themselves and gave to the other, and finally at the end she took from herself and gave to President Reagan, and it really took a toll on her too. She lost weight, she wasn't sleeping, but she did everything she could to ease him in his affliction in his later years. And
she has made each year since his passing.
Sorry,
I beg your pardon?
No, sorry, that we had a little technical glitch there. Some audio came up on the video.
Okay.
While you were speaking.
But yes, but of course he was there for her during her breast cancer surgeries, and she was there. Stu Spencer once told me, he was an old Reagan hand and very close friend of both the Reagans for many years, going back to the '66 gubernatorial campaign, and he was going on a political trip with Reagan, and they had gone to the LA train station, and she drove them there, got out of the car, and walked into the station with them. And as the porters are coming and going, and businessmen and businesswomen are coming and going, and there's all this hurly-burly, and the two of them are hugging each other and gazing into each other's eyes. And he said he'd never witnessed such a singular act of love and devotion as he had of the two of them, utterly and completely alone, completely tuned off to the outside world.
I have to ask you, because there's so much discussion, obviously, with their marriage and their love story, but she really had a unique childhood. I mean, to her story, she always says that her life didn't start until she met Ronald Reagan, but her childhood is fascinating in the sense that, her mother was an actress and left her with her aunt. And can you just describe kind of some of the struggles that she went through? Well,
yes, that's true. Is that her parents had divorced at an early age. Her mother was a showgirl, but she later, when Nancy was a little girl, married Dr. Loyal Davis of Chicago, who was a very famous doctor, and she was utterly and completely devoted to him. And as a matter of fact, they were of such good health. They were actually both still alive when he was elected in 1980 and when he became president in 1981. So they had, she had a very close relationship with her mother, although her mother was often described as not afraid to use four-letter words on occasion. But she was as much as Nancy Reagan was refined, her mother was a little bit more brassy.
Yeah, it sounds that way. I do have to ask too. Once she was
But
in
then,
the
then she went to Smith College,
Right.
which was academically tough. She graduated, unlike Barbara Bush also went to Smith College. Barbara Bush didn't graduate. Nancy Reagan did graduate, and it was an academically tough school. But she wanted to be an actress. She set out to be an actress, and she was an actress. And she was on her way to. She made a number of movies, was getting progressively better. But she met Ronald Reagan, and she was going to. She was, from the moment she laid eyes on him and the moment he laid eyes on her, they were going to be married, and they were going to be utterly and completely devoted to each other.
Yeah, she really, she left the career behind in Hollywood,
Yep.
really focused on the White House, really had influence on how the White House was run. And I've asked others, but
Well,
what do you
I
think
know
that was
Bill
about?
O'Reilly has reported that in his book, but there's a lot of errors in his book. Look, she said, I sleep with the president every night. And by the way, is that many presidents slept in separate bedrooms, including John Kennedy, the Kennedys, the Johnsons, and the Nixons. But I believe the Carters slept in the same bedroom, in the same bed, and certainly the Reagans did. And she said at the time, she said, look, I sleep next to the President of the United States every night. Of course I'm going to use a little bit of influence on him. But, it was more, it wasn't on nuclear policy or the Cold War or their tax cuts or whatever. It was more just on presentation, things like that. If she did offer suggestion, even then she was very careful. She didn't need to tell him what he already knew.
Do you think, we're in a time right now, obviously, with the presidential election happening, and there's so much debate going back and forth. She got herself involved in the 2008 presidential campaign, hosting 2 debates for Republican candidates at his library. Where do you think she plays into how politics kind of shape now going forward with these candidates? Everybody's obviously posting their condolences on Twitter and on social media. What type of influence will she have now that she's passed away?
That's a good question. I don't know. Obviously, his influence is clear, even years after his passing and even more years after his presidency. Nobody goes around calling themselves a Nixon Republican or a Bush Republican, but most everybody calls himself a Reagan Republican. So his influence over the party and the philosophy and the ideology is very clear. But I think that too is that part of that was part of his philosophy was arrived at in the early days, not because she was politically conservative or she read National Review or whatever else, but because she was an aide. She was a great balm to him. And he became more self-confident just from her being around. He used to write her notes when he was away, with a drawing of himself crying and say, "See what I'm like when I'm not with you." And he, there were many, signatories that he would, your loving roommate and that type of stuff. So it was, and he wrote her hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters. And when he was away from her, he wrote her letters every day.
Craig Shirley joining us from Alexandria, Virginia by phone. Thank you so much for your perspective on the Reagan's life. Just a fascinating look here on the former First Lady, Nancy Reagan, who has passed away at the age of 94.